CBS 46 News presents Public Affairs on Peach.
Well, good morning. Welcome to Public Affairs on Peach. I'm Ben Swan. This morning we take a look at a subject that's very much been in the news lately, fighting terrorism. My first guest is CBS 46 public safety consultant Mike Brooks. And Mike, we begin our discussion with an attack that occurred just a few days ago. A gunman opened fire on a GOP congressional baseball practice in Alexandria, Virginia, wounding Louisiana Congressman Steve Scalise and several others. With so much anger, part of the political exchange these days, do you fear that we may see more people express rage in this way with these kinds of violent attacks?
There's a good possibility, but you've got to see what was motivating this man to go and shoot up a baseball practice. Right. Did he know exactly what he was going to? Because there's reports that one of the congressmen had said that he walked up to him and said, is this a Republican or Democratic practice? Because they knew that there was some kind of baseball practice going on for the game to follow on Thursday night. But, so was this just spontaneous or was this a planned act? And what was the motivation of him behind it? Was it for the furtherance of political or social objectives, like the FBI definition of terrorism points out? Right. Or was it because of just he was a nutcase? Right.
So, obviously our subject today is fighting terrorism. Questions remain as to whether or not this will be classified as a terror attack, and a lot of it, you said, has to do with motivation. It's difficult to really ascertain someone's motivation, but there are certain clues you're looking for, correct?
There is. And, if we go back to 1998, July of 1998, you had Mr. Weston walked into the U.S. Capitol building with a gun and killed 2 U.S. Capitol police officers, and that was never classified as terrorism because he is still in a federal mental hospital because he was never found fit to stand trial. And there were no political or social objectives or motives behind his shooting. It was just believed that he was mentally deranged, so that was never classified as terrorism. But they're going to take a look at any of his writings, any notes. He apparently was living out of his car in the Alexandria area since March of this year. So they're going to take a look at all of that, the FBI, lead agency, and they're going to see what the actual motivation was behind the shooting.
Senator Rand Paul said something today, or a few days ago, in fact. He said that when this attack happened, had Steve Scalise, who was the majority whip for the Republicans, not been at the practice, he says this would have been a massacre because Scalise, and people may not realize this, has Capitol Police with him because he's a ranking member of the leadership, correct?
That's correct. Of the House and Senate, if you are a ranking member, you have a security detail by the Dignitary Protection Division of the United States Capitol Police. They're called special agents. And in this particular case, there were at least 2 special agents there, with Representative Scalise because he is a majority whip. And you're right. And I think Senator Rand Paul is right on target. If they had not been there, it could have been a massacre. It could have been much worse. But they took action, and they were the true heroes on Wednesday.
A lot of concerns about that issue, but let's talk about the bigger picture here. We have not had large-scale terror attacks here in the U.S. Why do you think that is? Is it the apparatus of intelligence that's fighting it? Is it law enforcement being savvy? What is it?
I think it's all the above. I think it's the local, state, and federal law enforcement working together on the over 100 now that we have, over 100 FBI Joint Terrorism Task Forces around the country. And I think the different security agencies, the CIA, the FBI, and others, they get along much better. We look at everything in the intelligence community pre and post 9/11. And I think since 9/11, the sharing of information has gotten much better between all of the different intelligence agencies, as well as some of the different foreign intelligence agencies that the FBI and CIA deal with on a regular basis.
Let's talk about the Pulse nightclub shooting. The 1-year anniversary of that took place this past week. What have we learned from that? Have we gotten smarter? Have we gotten better equipped to deal with that kind of attack? Or is that something that it's difficult because you get somebody for whatever reason and they lead this kind of solo lone wolf, I know is the term that's used often, lone wolf attack on a group of people who were not ready to defend themselves?
Well, we look at that, and in law enforcement, whenever something like that happens, they go back and say, okay, what could we have done better? And with the Pulse attack, it seemed like that he was self-radicalized. Now they go back and they take a look at his masjid. What were his beliefs? Did his wife really know? Did anyone else know? We go back and look at the San Bernardino case where other people knew about the couple before this happened. But in this particular case, sometimes it's very, very hard. And people say, well, why didn't the FBI do more? Well, they had actually gone out and interviewed him at least twice before the Pulse attack, but was there any criminality involved, and was he an imminent threat at that particular time when he was interviewed? And the FBI deemed that at that time he was not.
After 9/11, the big fear were sleeper cells. You had these cells of terrorists who were going to conduct some kind of a dirty bomb attack, or they would take part in some kind of large-scale attack.
Sure.
But that's not really what we've seen here in the U.S. And what we have seen, the term that you've used, self-radicalized individuals who were leading these attacks. We're also seeing that in Europe. We're going to talk more about Europe later. But how do you deal with that in terms of a law enforcement perspective? Because it is very different dealing with the self-radicalized individual as opposed to a cell, is it not? It
is, and we talk about cells, and there are cells out there. There could possibly be cells. Whenever there's an incident that happens, that you take that individual to see if he or she was involved and had any communication. But you also, with social media the way it is now, we look at social media and there are different secure ways to interface with different folks via social media that might not be picked up by law enforcement. And you also look at some of the teachings, if you will, some of the influence maybe by ISIS or other groups, Al-Qaeda, because we look at the traditional methods of terrorism, guns and bombs, and now we saw, and we're going to talk about it a little bit later, in Europe, where they're using just vehicles to go ahead and run people over, and knives.
Well, we'll talk about that on the other side of this break, because when Public Affairs on Peach returns, we're going to shift our attention overseas with our focus on recent terror attacks in Europe.